order.
Okay, welcome to the April 22nd School Board Study Session. We're going to start this meeting with open forum, and we have two speakers. I am not going to read the rules again. If we start having any issues with the rules not being followed, then I will start reading them again. But first, I'd like to ask Sarah Anderson.
Thank you. I am a member of the Curriculum Committee. I joined due to the documented several-year downward trend of test scores here, and am hoping we can reverse this. I see incongruent district priorities based on the committee meetings. The selection of this new middle school math, CPM, was touted as needed to reverse the decline. Dr. Edwards even put his job on the line, promising test scores will improve over the next 3 years. Even with that commitment, which I appreciate, I still don't have confidence that scores will improve based on the very last curriculum committee meeting. I don't have time to share all of the concerning quotes verbatim, but I do have them documented from the meeting. Some disparities that I noted from the meeting were, 1, Dr. Thomas said the curriculum is proven successful in other schools. Then when asked for data, we were told that we're using a 2-year-old curriculum and there is no data because 1 year was a pilot year. And the 2 Minnesota schools cited as using it have abysmal test results. I'm wondering if our kids are guinea pigs. We were told the students love it, but at a recent school board meeting, we heard from 4 diverse, great students that they don't. But then we were told at a curriculum meeting, they just don't like change or doing hard things. We were told surveys were done of parents and students, yet I know for a fact many never got a survey. Of note, many were parents with students who don't like the curriculum. And I learned some parent surveys were not even taken into account and presented. Additional data presented was incomplete and or not applicable and did not support the claims. We were told it is the teachers who make the students more proficient in math, yet we're then repeatedly told we need a new curriculum to help the students be more proficient in math. They scored higher on tests with the current curriculum and many of the same teachers. So perhaps we are looking for answers in the wrong places. We were told this new curriculum is promising, yet readily available information around the country is replete with negative reviews and concerns about it. I am concerned the selection of CPM may be a decision that could end up hurting our students rather than improving things for them. I'm asking you to please do more research and consider waiting on a decision. Thank you.
Okay, next we have Steve Anderson.
Hello. My name is Steve Anderson and I'm a 23-year resident of Prior Lake. I would like to also echo the concerns about the declining test scores in our district that were previously articulated. In the past, our teachers, thank you middle school math teachers by the way, used the current curriculum to produce great results. My understanding is that these MCA scores were as high as around 80% in 2017. That sounds fantastic. However, beginning a little bit before COVID, we've seen a significant decline in test scores down to the current levels, around 50%. This catastrophic decline in such a short time makes me wonder what the heck is going on in our district. Surely COVID and all of the idiocy around that had a negative effect across the board on learning. But are we to conclude that it is the only cause? Certainly not. But is the curriculum to blame? How can the same curriculum that produced excellent results 10 years ago suddenly now have to be replaced? And replaced with a curriculum that hasn't even been really tested by other schools. At the last curriculum committee meeting, I believe it was Sam Hendrickson who said the quiet part out loud when he mentioned that this new untested version of the CPM curriculum is also an attempt to address certain SEL learning objectives. It sounds like the new curriculum certainly checks the latest political correctness box and is supposed to make 2 + 2 more culturally sensitive. Is that really the priority and purpose of middle school math? Are we really willing to foist upon our kids a curriculum which many don't think is good and hasn't even been proven effective just because it's politically correct? Also alarming is the financial cost. At a recent board meeting, a serious budget shortfall was discussed that would require deep cuts in the budget. It has been stated that this new untested curriculum represents a significant expense and that the current curriculum is already paid for. My question, are we being wise with our limited dollars to purchase a new middle school math curriculum when we have one that's paid for? I'll end with this. If the curriculum is not the root cause of the problem with our students' ability to learn math, and I don't see how it can be given the previous positive results, changing it is not going to solve the problem. Thank you for your time.
Okay, next on the agenda, actually I'm going to hand it over to Dr. Thomas to talk about the purpose and the agenda for tonight.
Thank you, Chair Franz and board directors. This evening, our ability to have a good work session with you all is to really get a lot of your perspectives and feedback on a variety of topics, and we have quite a few to go through tonight. First, we will go through our middle school FastBridge data that wasn't available at the time that we did our quarterly report because we're still in the tested window, so we'll share that. We have our annual wellness report that we present to the board each year. We will talk about our budget and enrollment update to include a variety of things, but in those two categories, which are interwoven. We'll talk about both the superintendent and board evaluation processes. We have a few proclamations that we'll review, and then we'll go into a series of policies. First reading tonight pertaining to our 400, 500, and 600 series policies, with then a closure of some strategic plan updates, a quick calendar change based upon oversight that we caught, and then that will conclude our work session. Oh, I take that, yeah, that will conclude the study session.
Okay. Okay, so first order on the agenda is the FastBridge data.
Yeah, thank you. We will have Dr. Zumbush come forward, and she will review the middle school FastBridge data that we didn't have at the time that we initially presented.
This should be pretty brief because it's just one subject area, but as a reminder, there is a FastBridge mid-year update talking about winter or fall to winter data. The middle school, we didn't have data yet for the middle school math due to their administration window, but we have it now. So here it's the same format as the other data slides I gave in the past. You can see this is 6th, 7th, and 8th grade in math. The numbers on the lower left-hand side are the number of students who are administered the FastBridge assessment out of the total number of students in that grade level. So you can see that there's some variability, but we do our best to screen every student. It depends kind of on absences and attendance and things like that. But here you can see kind of a bit of a downward trajectory for from fall to winter. Again, the purple on the top of the line are students who are not at risk or are on track. The numbers at the top give the percentage of students who fall into that category, and then the pink and the dark pink on the bottom of the line show students who are not currently on track or might have some risk factors.
Sorry, what was the dark purple?
The line, the horizontal line, is the line between on track and not on track. The dark purple basically means, some or I think is called On Track, and then the light purple is the college pathway level.
So is that, I was just gonna ask, is this all the students in 6th, 7th, and 8th grade, including both the pilot and the non-pilot? And so, can you say one more time again, which part is the ones who are in the pilot?
There's no pilot distinction here.
Oh, okay, I'm sorry, I
This is
thought you said
just-
dark purple versus light purple.
That's students who are on track versus not on track. That's the delineator. But this is across the board, all of our students.
Total, but not
Total.
broken out by pilot versus
Not
non-pilot.
broken out by pilot.
And what does the no data to compare mean?
That just means, it's a weird default indicator in FastBridge. It basically just means I haven't filled out all of the time bars across here. I can compare up to 5 data points. It's kind of a confusing box that kind of automatically shows up in FastBridge when I'm making these. So it's a weird message that just shows up.
So do
yeah.
you have FastBridge data from last year where you can compare where were our 6th, 7th, and 8th graders? Because I looked on our presentation from last year and they weren't included in that.
None of them were, or the middle school?
There wasn't anything included.
Okay. Yeah, we would have it from last year. I'd have to pull it again, grade by grade. Or I mean, I do pull data all the time. I'm sure I have it somewhere that I can.
I think given the pilot and given the concerns that we've heard, it would be interesting to see this exact same data in this exact same format from last year and even the year prior, so that we can sort of see what the trend was with the different curriculum.
I can certainly pull that.
Yeah, and I want to just kind of, because this was a discussion that got brought up in the Teaching and Learning Committee, and the important piece to consider too is when we do look at year over year, we're not comparing apples to apples. When you look, FastBridge is designed to look within year. When you look at a student who is in 6th grade compared to 7th grade, they're actually in different math. And so you can't rule out the noise of the content because you're not comparing like content to like content. So I think that's an important factor to keep under consideration as we look at year-over-year data versus within-year data, which is within the same content of the same student in that same developmental learning year.
And I do remember that conversation. And then when I was reviewing our policies today, I started reading 616, and the policy specifically says that we need to show growth relative to an individual's student's prior achievement. And so indicators of achievement and prior achievement must be based on highly reliable state and district-wide assessments.
Right, and that's what we're showing here. We're showing growth from prior, and prior is fall to winter. So we are meeting the policy here within year and meeting the,
I'm not saying that.
Oh, okay.
What I'm trying to understand is, I think there's 2 different ways to look at it. I fully understand how you take a student and you're looking at growth from fall to winter. But in my mind, I'm trying to say, where were our 6th graders at as a total, not an individual student, where were our 6th graders at last year in fall, winter, versus where are our 6th graders at this year, fall, winter. I understand it's a different cohort of children, but with curriculum changes, we should be able to see if there's any data or pattern. It should be an interesting data point to analyze. And that to me is apples to apples comparison.
There's a lot of kids that didn't take these tests, so understand that there's copious amounts of reasons. So they were absent that day, they opted out. I mean,
Student refusal. I think you'll see as it gets older, there's lower participation. You know, our 6th grade participation is only 15 different, and then
right.
8th is higher. So I think you just, naturally as students get older, you get a little bit more of the student refusal in assessments. Because it's not, I mean, and rightfully so, it's not anything to do with their grade. So it's, I mean, it's a voluntary, I mean, there's nothing else for them to do at that time, but you can't force a student to do it. So I think it's just harder as they get older to,
I just think that's important to point out that It's not applicable to all kids. Or, I mean, these data points don't represent all kids.
When we are seeing an increase in, or maybe a decrease in participation for testing, whether it be MCA, you know, what I'm trying to grasp is how do we, or even you as the administration, how do you, how are the measuring points, how do we solidify them, you know, as you know, as time changes. I feel like, you know, when my 20-year-old was in elementary school or middle school taking MCAs, it wasn't a thought to be opted out. That has changed a lot. So as the focus on testing, as all of that changes, that it becomes hard as board members to look at data from year to year and try to make good decisions. I can only imagine it being hard administratively. But what are things that we're doing, you know, I don't know, if you can just speak on that. If that even makes sense.
If I may take.
Can we verify, like especially with MCAs, if there is a lower participation rate? And the only reason I ask is because I looked it up on MD last night. I was literally, I don't know why I was looking at it. And we actually have an increased rate of participation compared to 2017. Percentage-wise.
I requested a data set directly from MDE on that topic
perfect.
area, so I'm happy to
I
put
didn't mean to
together
interrupt, but I think
some data on that.
finding some truth behind that is really important, because it came up also at our teaching and learning committee as well.
And that's interesting, because I have not seen that particular data that there's been an increase in participation. I haven't heard that.
You can't actually, I mean, to pull it out of the MDE data file, you need to go individual tab by grade, by subject. And like from a data mining perspective, that was just a capacity that we didn't have. And so I did reach out to MDE, requested that file in a more usable format. So I have that information that I can present in a different way. But it's really, really difficult to pull that directly from the data center.
I guess my question about this is, and because I look at that participation, we're over 90%. I mean, I don't think it's abysmal at all. You know, I think it's pretty indicative, shows us what's going on. Data doesn't give us answers. It gives us opportunity to ask better questions. So my question is, as our leadership and staff are digesting this, what is their feedback and what's been their experience? You know, were they surprised? Were they not? Are they challenged by this because that's not what they're seeing in their classroom? Yeah. You know,
That's where I was going to go in response to Director Bowden's question with regard to any of the standardized data, whether it be FastBridge, whether it be MCA, is one set of data that our teachers look at. Classroom assessment data, unit tests, formative assessments, some of the test assessments at the end of the unit are also ways in which they measure students' progress and utilize a tool such as this, specifically FastBridge in the winter. And we often talk about the importance within their learning teams to look at, is this data match what you see on a weekly basis, sometimes daily basis, or certainly within a unit? Do you see alignment in the students who are identified in each of these categories? To what you're seeing in the classroom, to what the performance data, i.e. report card data might show. So the importance of that triangulation of multiple data sources to help both determine the progress of a student as well as the supports that a student might need or the additional challenge that a student might need. So that is what I wanted to, in response to that specific question. It really is any of the standardized data that we have access to is really one piece of data or two pieces of data of a much more comprehensive look at an individual student. And I think that was something that was shared at our teaching and learning advisory and additional information that will come back in response to the direction with regard to our middle school math curriculum. When we come back at the next board meeting, we'll be sharing some of that additional data that we have around student performance in class, grade data, as well as data related to the specific, as Director Atkinson asked, with regard to pilot students.
I would say too, this is not what teachers see when they look at FastBridge. This is the district overall, very tip of the iceberg, but what teachers see, and you can look at the data in all different ways. One of them, you can actually look at the student growth percentile by START score. So you can look at, of the students who maybe started in the 10th percentile, what was their percentile growth from fall to winter? So you can look really at an individualized level, and then it identifies skills and specific things that that student may need to be retaught or reviewed or taught explicitly or intervened in a way to get, it has a specific, it's called a individual skills report. So it'll say based on the questions they ask, right or wrong, if there's specific skills that they're lacking, and it'll tell you how to do that. And there's interventions built into FastBridge. So the depth of FastBridge is really extensive. This is just the really high level overview summary. It doesn't really show, I mean, I think one of the things that, you know, a student could go from the bottom of the light purple to the top of the light purple, and that's not going to change anything in there. But if you're looking at it from a student perspective, they would have a lot of growth, or vice versa. Maybe, you know, they are doing well, but they're not growing compared to those other students who have the same START score. And that would be a different intervention or a different, you know, instructional response than, you know, in a different way. So this is really, this system, and I think that's probably why that weird, it's really designed for teachers and for schools and teams to look at. It's not as designed for more of that analytical reporting, but we do it kind of as that dipstick measure.
Right.
Sorry, so what I understand you're saying is that the teachers and the educators are not looking at this aggregate level at all.
Right.
They're looking at the
skills.
detail. They have a lot more information about the individual classes the students are in, and that's what they're looking at. So
Right.
this is not used.
They might look at it for the BILTS, the Building Instructional Leadership Team, they might look at the aggregate at the school level or by grade as they're doing their mid-year reflection on their school improvement plans. But the individual teachers are not really looking at it from an aggregate, they're looking from an individual or a group of student perspective.
And once again, engaging with their colleagues in a conversation around, here is the data that I'm finding from this assessment, as well as the other data that I have available to me about my students, and engaging in conversation if there are certain skill gaps. How are you as a teacher addressing those skill gaps in your class versus how I might be addressing them? And that's part of the learning team conversation that takes place on a weekly basis.
And the greater drill down you said is coming up at the board meeting, or where we're going to get?
We'll do the comparisons on some of the CPM cohorts that we were just discussing. But the skill drill down gets individualized. We can identify kids, but we can look across the board, you know, at various levels. So we can look at the district level to say what's the lowest skill that's coming across for 6th grade, for example. But then as a principal, I might look at that, and then to Dr. Edwards' point, based upon our SIP goal, we'll look at this, but then maybe our departmental or grade level PLC has a different goal, so we'll look at this. But the conversations with families are the critical piece. And having that skill conversation with families so they understand truly where their student is, because again, to the average person, this will tell you trends that doesn't really tell you performance. And I think the performance conversations are the more impactful kind of one-to-one teacher to parent, teacher to student conversations.
So this in itself does not reflect the CPM curriculum. You will be breaking that out at the
That's a different presentation that will be given to the board.
And how does the FastBridge testing compare to the MCA testing? Like, is it the same format on an iPad? Like, can you give a little bit of, because again, you have two different data points really, and I understand that this one is easier to access right on, you know, you can,
In time.
yeah, in time, basically. So how do they compare as far as the actual like content and or how they take the test? Is it similar? Like, that's what I always wondered about FastBridge versus MCAs. Like,
There's an alignment, but it's not predictive. So you can't take your FastBridge scores and indicate what you're going to potentially do on the MCAs. And the reason is because FastBridge is a screener for foundational skills. MCAs measure grade level content. And so in general, you need all of those foundational skills in order to access grade level content. But just because you have foundational skills doesn't mean inherently that you did or that you tried. You know, like I think there's, you know, that other piece too. Like there's the engagement effort. I think, in fact, I think that there's more, from what I've heard around schools, I think there's more student buy-in to FastBridge because they see an immediate response from their teacher and some things that they could potentially do differently. The MCAs, they don't see anything till the following fall, and I think it's kind of something that, you know, they don't really necessarily aren't as bought into, especially as the students get older. But yeah, it's measuring, if you have all the things in place for FastBridge, you should be able to access the grade level content and do well in MCAs. But there's obviously a lot of different combinations that can happen. They're inherently measuring different things.
in the fall, when they take the data in the fall, because kids coming back over summer, you know, there's obviously like a little bit of loss of learning over the summer. What are they testing them on? Are they testing them on what they learned the previous year, or what they should know, or?
It's all just the foundationals, each grade level, and each band is even different, like what it measures in like fall of kindergarten and fall or winter of kindergarten is different because there's a natural progression that goes in terms of the core areas of math and reading. So it's you know, it's cumulative, but it's again not necessarily exactly in line with the standards because those are specific for the grades. These are more of a skills progression.
Right, which to me would be, you'd want to see an opposite of what's happening here on the scale. I mean, you'd want to see, wouldn't you want to see like fall and then it get a little bit higher in the winter and a little bit higher in the spring because they're building on their foundational skills?
Yeah, I mean, I think, yeah, you would always want to see all the data go in an upward trajectory. I think that is, I think often, and maybe this is what your question was kind of earlier, you do kind of see over time, like a little bit of a winter dip and then back up in the spring. And I don't know exactly if that's because the fall is kind of more foundational and then it gets more rigorous, but, and also the winter is really that only opportunity for you to make that mid-course correction and then see the results in the spring. So I'm hoping that it would, you know, we do kind of see that like oscillating trend in a lot of students where it kind of goes up and down over time. And I think it's just because learning isn't, you know, totally in a straight line. And oftentimes students are kind of, you know, catching up or lagging behind just as these different windows happen. So I've looked at a lot of different individual student trends and a lot of them have kind of that oscillating trend.
Yeah, that's what will be interesting to see what last year's was, to see if we have that same trend, where it was high in the fall, down in the winter, and up in the spring, so.
So if I may get clarification around that, Director Atkinson, so that we bring the data and have an understanding of what you're looking for specifically and we can attack the data in that way. Cohort, you would use the term cohort. So I just want to understand how you're viewing cohort and just make sure we have a common understanding around that.
Well, I think what's unique to this year is you have a pilot, right? And so I think in order to have it be apples to apples, you almost have to have both the pilot, just like it is here, both the pilot and the non-pilot data. Well, there would be no pilot last year, actually.
Correct.
So then there's just the data, right, from exactly like we're seeing it here. So 6th, 7th, and 8th in the same format. And then here, maybe you can break out the pilot versus the non-pilot, so you can see an apples-to-apples comparison.
We will be doing that for the CPM report.
Yes. Yep. I was hearing you make a different request, so that helps. That helps me understand. So, and I'll retract my kind of push on that because I thought you were asking, take this year's 7th graders, for example, and compare them to when they were in 6th grade last year. So now I understand that the ask that, because I was going to get clarification, you were ahead of me, so thank you.
So 6th grade trend from a few years ago, last year, this year, knowing that
of
there's
6th grade as
different
a cohort.
kids, but in general, just looking at how the
6th
shape
graders.
looks.
How did our
How
sixth-
6th graders
Yeah, how did our
perform?
6th, 7th, and 8th graders do in math in Fastbridge last year, and then breaking this data out by Fastbridge versus regular curriculum?
Yeah, we
So
got
I'm gonna
Interesting.
ask the rest of the board this, since we only have one board member speaking. Do we want to see, because I remember seeing the Fast Bridge, but I don't remember if I saw it because I sat in an office or because they actually showed it to the board.
It wasn't.
So, but I know I saw it. So, does everyone on the board, because we're gonna do an academic drill down anyways in our next retreat, not our current next one, but the next one after that. Do we want to have an adjustment to another study session to show this data other than or were we gonna, are you
I
gonna?
think we would add this
to the one?
this will be part of, it's how we disaggregate the data in May.
Okay,
And I think that's
At the board.
easy enough for us to, I understand the ask. I think it's an important clarification to be able to do some kind of comparative analysis
okay.
on both cohort over time and math pilot versus non-math pilot as well, which won't be over time, obviously, as we just stated.
So just show the snapshot from
We'll
last
show
year.
the snapshot on the
Right.
comparison of CPM, non-CPM, but then we'll be able to do a bit of a longitudinal of cohort over like a 3-year average.
For Fastbridge?
Correct.
I think we just started 3 years ago.
Correct.
before that, right? We
Yeah,
just
I
started
think it was
Fastbridge
3
when
years.
we
We're in our
moved
third
from-
year. I believe we're in our third year.
Yeah. So,
I think there was some spotty data before that, but
Yeah,
yeah.
Yeah.
but yeah.
That's the.
Universal,
I wanna avoid-
Yeah,
universally applied, yes.
I just want to make sure that we're avoiding the spotty data because
Yeah,
of the
I
way it got rolled
definitely
out.
avoid that,
Yeah.
Okay.
And your
And we'll
friends
be able to
also
see that by the
3 years.
numbers of,
Right. And
Participants,
then 3
yeah.
years ago, because we were coming out of the COVID,
Yeah.
that's the confusing part for me. So I want to make sure that we are actually able to take the snapshot at different points of time that are equal.
I think the other really confusing part is we used to be able to really look at trends over time, and
And the
now
old one,
it's really tricky because each cohort of kids has a very different learning and gap, the way they went through COVID was very different, so it's a little bit more nuanced now than I think we used to be able to just look at trends over time, and cohorts were generally comparable, and now it's a little bit trickier, but as long as we all understand the different caveats of that.
Okay.
And to
Right.
friends, it was the February 13th board meeting of 2023 where the Fastbridge data was presented. And
So
it's
it was
not,
presented.
not in this format. There was no data presented.
not for middle school math, because we didn't have that assessment.
Right, we didn't have
She's
the
talking about
assessment. at
I'm
that
talking
time.
last year, February
Last year.
13th,
Okay.
23.
I know I saw math last year, but I may have done it by meeting independently too, so.
I just looked at it today.
All
Thank
right.
All right. Thank you, Dr. Zembler.
Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, so the next topic is wellness.
Yeah, and I believe we have Director Malone. Oh, there she is.
The laptop is presented.
Wellness policy. This is an annual update that we do every year. I don't think we've done quite, as this isn't necessarily in-depth, but quite as much of an in-depth presentation in the last several years, probably since before COVID, so I thought it'd be a good time to just do a refresh. So I know you guys all have it, so I won't read it word for word or anything, but schools that are just participating in the National School Lunch and the National School Breakfast Program have to have a student wellness policy. We just updated ours in December of 2023, as you probably remember. Part of the local wellness policy is that we have to do a triennial assessment. So we just did ours last month, and we are doing the update with you guys. So it's a written document that tells the education agency how we are supporting nutrition in our schools, basically. Federal law requires it. They require that we have nutrition promotion, nutrition education, physical activity, and other school-based activities that promote student wellness. Oh, I'm sorry, I'm not forwarding it. Here we are. So that all has to be in the policy. And then I pulled these out. There's a whole lot of things that are required, but these are kind of the main ones. We have to have standards and nutrition guidelines. Anything that is sold in the school from midnight to 30 minutes after the school day has to follow these Smart Snack in Schools nutrition standards. Requirements for marketing and advertising of food and beverages on school grounds. And then we have to include a description of how we get our public involved with our wellness policy. And this is student wellness only, so it's not staff wellness. So like I said, we just did an audit of ours. We used the WellSat 3.0, if you want to click through that. We're ahead of the curve a little bit here in Prior Lake. The first one was due in 2022, but we did ours in 2019, and then the next one is due a little over a year from now, but we just did ours, just because it's time. And we did come up short in a few areas, and the main one is that our student wellness committee has kind of fallen by the wayside after and during COVID. So that'll be our first step, is to get community members, students, staff, whoever would like to participate in our wellness committee together and meeting, and then we'll come up with some initiatives and get back on track.
How are you recruiting for that committee?
I don't know yet. I'm not sure. I think in the past we just sent out an email to board members and staff, and then had to kind of volunteer a few people to get people to participate. So,
When's the last time we had this?
So our last meetings were 2000. Let's see, we're 24. It would have been like beginning of the 22-23 school year. Yeah, around then. You know, we kind of went to virtual, and then things just fizzled. Yeah. So the Tower Gardens at Five Hawks were a result of this.
I remember that.
Yeah, and then we did, so some of the things that we've done, and we usually get grants for it, is that. We also got big, huge plastic boxes of like frisbees and basketballs and jump ropes and stuff like that for the middle schools, so that when they were able to go outside, they had something to do.
This might be a really dumb question, but to my knowledge, our high school does not participate in the National School Lunch Program. So how does the high school fit into this? Are they exempt from it, or are they still included in the analysis?
They are not included in the analysis.
Okay.
Yeah, so for example, there are things that happen at the high school that they would need to stop if we do go on the program at the high school.
Okay.
Such as things that we sell at the school store.
Yep.
Those would have to be Smart Snack approved. Wouldn't be able to do any of like the fundraising stuff during the day that has food in it.
Just good to be aware.
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. Thanks.
Are the Try It Tuesdays included in the Smart Snack approved? I've heard a lot
Yeah.
of chirping in our community about the crickets that they're having tomorrow. I was kind of hoping you'd bring a sample of the chocolate-covered cricket.
So that's funny that you said that, because my assistant director came back after delivering all of them today, and I was like, oh, I wish he would have kept some. I didn't even think of that. So, but I think we'll have extra, so maybe I'll be able to keep some for you. So.
Check your mailboxes.
Yeah.
Only if it's in a sealed package.
Because it's a Try It, it does. Yeah.
Well, I was happy to see the email go out to parents, because I know there's a lot of parents that might be opposed to their child eating. But,
they don't have to try it. It's just a Try It.
Yeah, what happens? Like, can you tell me how that works? Or, I mean, like,
Yeah, so students come through the line. We have a little sign that says what we're serving as a Try It, and they can take it or they don't have to. Yeah. They don't look like crickets. They look like a truffle, or not a truffle, but like a turtle. Is that what those are? Like a mound, of chocolate,
yeah,
like a chocolate
yeah.
cluster. So
It has crunched up crickets
in it.
So my oldest, when he was 20, on his 13th birthday, him and all of his friends dried crickets because we had a reptile at the time. And
Oh.
so that wasn't part of the try it. That
No,
wasn't part of the
no,
try.
and these are
And they
food
weren't
grade.
talking.
Trailblazer.
I'm just saying.
Yeah.
Yeah, right.
These are food grade, organic, they're a local Minnesota company.
Random facts.
I know it seems really odd for us, however, 80% of the world eats bugs on a regular basis. So part of the message that we're trying to convey to all of our staff and students and parents is that, you know, while it might not be normal for us to do that here, it is a culturally significant item in many other cultures. And so if you don't want to try it or you don't want your student to try it, that's okay. But we don't want any student that may eat this regularly at home to feel shame about it, because food is a really significant part of culture. So, all right.
Thank you.
And everybody who got it delivered today was like, oh, these don't even look like crickets. I think it was the visual that was like scaring people. Like, here's some crickets. Interesting. Thank you.
Okay, so Chair of Finance and Board Directors, we will, if there's no more questions on that, we'll go forward with our budget and enrollment update. And I'll turn it over to Executive Director Frederickson and Herman to open up this conversation.
Thomas, Chair Franz, members of the board. I think we'll start with the first document I have on here is the revenue expense history. You've seen this at our last meeting. I just want to bring it up again to reiterate. If you look at the last 7-8 years of our budget history, you'll see that the percentage of what we spend in our expenditures and what we get in revenue is very consistent year over year as far as percentages of where we spend the dollars. There's a couple changes that we'll see in the next document, but for 24-25, last time you saw this document, we had $119.9 million in total revenue. Since we met last time, we've had to look at our expenses and the things that we had agreed to reduce in our budget. And one of the things that we are having challenges with is we are going to be getting significantly more special education students with significantly more needs. So while we originally had thought we were going to be able to reduce the budget in special ed by about $648,000, we're not going to be able to do that. And in fact, we're going to have to increase the budget expenses in special ed by about $1.5 million. There are some revenues that will be able to offset some of that. One of them is our federal dollars this year. We don't anticipate spending all of them. So we're anticipating about $800,000 in carryover money. So we'll be able to utilize that. And then also, as you increase your special ed expenses, you're also going to see additional special ed reimbursement in the formulas. So we'll have an offset in revenue for that. But we are going to be increasing the expenses to show that and the revenues to offset some of that. So while we originally had thought we were going to be able to reduce about $4.9 million, almost $5 million, we are actually down to reducing about $3.2 million. We still have a delta, if you will, about $968,000, or just under $1 million. But again, we're not, if you look at how we're spending our dollars, it's not going to be significantly different from how we have been spending it in the past, other than the increase in the special education expenses. The other document that...
Can we pause on that? I have some questions about this document, if you don't mind. So on this document, is the categorical funding that's on this document, the increase in, if I'm reading this correctly, 3.3 million in state special education fund, is that included in the top revenue? So I see it on the bottom, we're at 21.3 million under categorical, and last year we were at 17.9 million. So is that increase in funding from special ed?
So those are expenses.
Oh, those are expenses, okay.
The revenue is just the first, very top of the spreadsheet.
Okay, so it's.
So those expenses, it's going from 17.9, 23, 24 to 21.2 and 24, 25.
Okay.
So that's going to include all of the expenses related to increased salaries, increased positions, and the additional students that are going to be showing up.
So the additional 8 that we're getting though is included in the top of the revenue. The reason I was confused is because under categorical, there's grants, and grants would be revenue, is that correct? Or is that how the grants would be spent?
These are expenses. So under the revenue, grants would be under some of it in the other category and some in federal sources. Federal sources will be grants, but that's reflected in the revenue on the top.
Okay.
And then the expenses related to those grant dollars are reflected in the bottom.
Okay, so all revenues up top, so an increase of about 4.8 million over last year in revenue. And for expenses, we're an increase of about 8 million over last year. Is that correct? Okay.
And the 8 million increase in expenses does not reflect the 3.2 million in reductions that we've already been making. What I'm trying to show you on here is that our expenses are exceeding our revenue. So we have talked about those reductions that we're going to be making in the expenditures.
Yeah, I found it interesting, and thank you for clarifying that, because that helps me better understand the report. But I found it interesting that for 2 years, our revenue was very similar and our expenses was very similar. So for like the last 2 years, we've been able to hold our revenue and our expenses at pretty much the same number. But this year, we've seen a huge increase in expenses at 8 million, but we've also seen a huge increase in revenue at 4.8 million. So I'm just trying to understand where that increase in expenditures is coming from, and I really appreciate you breaking it out. I think what would be really interesting to see is when you look at like some of the big numbers, like at the high school, we're increasing, if I'm reading this correctly again, correct me if I'm wrong, we're increasing expenses by almost $1 million at the high school, but yet our enrollment is declining. And at Tom's, we're increasing it by almost $1 million in expenses, and we're seeing declining enrollment. You know, also, I mean, any place that we're seeing an increase, whether it be the board of directors budget at $45,000, or, you know, communications budget was increased by $76,000, curriculum $130,000, operation maintenance $1.3 million. Any place we're seeing increases, I think it'd be really interesting to have it like a more detail or more information on why we're seeing increases in those categories.
So I think we have talked about that a few times, that all of our salaries are going to be increased. We have collective bargaining agreements that we have to manage with, and all of them are coming in higher. You all have approved the teachers at the 9.54 compounded. So we know that all of the teacher salaries are going to be increased. We've talked about the transportation contract is going up 6%. All of our health insurance is going up 5%. Our liability insurance has gone up. Our cyber security insurance has gone up. All of our insurance have gone up. Utilities has gone up 8%. I mean, it's just inflation and kind of the cost of how things are falling out now.
They've gone up consistently over time. It's not just, we didn't see this huge jump. That's the percentages. You see that utilities are 1.6, 1.8, or 2%, or down to 1.8%.
Chair France, I challenge you to go look at the high school number though.
So I'm looking at expenses. I'm looking at utilities.
Okay, I understand utilities, and that's
I'm looking at
correct.
assessments. I'm looking at the detailed breakdown of the expenditures.
I
Now, when you look at the building level, that's when they aggregate. Is that correct?
Right. So at the high school, for instance, this current year we have 18.4 million expenses, which equates to about 15.8% of the total budget goes to the high school. For next year, we're projecting 19.3 million, which is 15.5. So it's actually a 0.3% decrease of the overall budget.
But it's almost $1 million increase.
Because we have many teachers, staff at the high school that are going to get the increase for teachers. Our paraprofessionals, the salaries have increased.
And all the sped
So
programs.
it went from
programs.
15.6 million to 17.07 to 18.48 to 19.3. So it's gone up almost exactly with the rate of inflation, actually, if you take the percentages. Just a little less than the actual rate of inflation. So, and it's been consistently around 15% of the total budget. And you can definitely see the impact of the COVID dollars here.
Well, and I think like Hidden Oaks didn't, or one of the middle schools did not increase as much. So I'm just trying, and I would say, okay, fine, if the schools is all based on employees, then can you help me understand the increase in $76,000 in the communications budget?
We added a staff person to handle the data request. So that was approved by the board, adding that position. They also have the front desk person now reports to communication. So that moved into that department also.
Yeah, and I think there was some technology purchased as well to help with the data requests as well, I saw in the register.
Mm-hmm.
And then the school board budget, the increase of $45,000 plus elections. So
We had an election last year.
there was no charge for election. I looked in the budget. I think what's allocated for this year's election has to do with the levy. So we can talk about that when we get to that
No,
point.
we actually do take a share of every election. It's been the same way every single year.
Wasn't it?
Yeah, no, every year.
$100,000 we spent on the election last year. Is that what you're saying, Director?
No, I'm saying that you just said that we don't have the election money, and it is definitely, every year we get the election dollars in there. Every year.
Okay, well, I will send you the report that I received from Director Frederickson that breaks down every single expense for every board director, and there's nothing in there for elections.
It's actually, the one that I sent you, that report just broke out the board of directors. We actually have a separate cost center for elections. For the purposes of reporting this, we put them together. But there is, in our general ledger, there is a separate cost center just for elections.
So for the 2022 election, it'd be interesting to see that.
We can get you that data.
Yeah, I mean, I'm trying to compare, like, how much are we really spending on elections?
We also have the cost for the recount, right?
Correct.
Yeah, okay. Because I know I paid attention to that. We actually have the names listed of every single election judge and everything like that in there, and how much we have to pay
We
them.
had to pay.
That's definitely in the detail. And it's in the breakdown of the financial
I saw that, yes.
transactions.
I wasn't referring to that recount. That actually is on that same report.
The second document that I have in here, again, is an update from the one that you've seen in the past. I was just updating the special ed expenses and revenue that we're going to be receiving. We have taken off the Schoology software, so that's no longer a reduction. So you can see that we still have $968,470 that we have not been able to identify in reductions in order to balance to the $120 million. Right now, if we take out that almost $1 million that we haven't identified yet, we're at about $121.6 million, with revenue of about $120.7 million, which is $968,470. I guess at this point, the request that we're going to make of the board tonight is to consider allowing us to use fund balance in order to get the balanced budget for that $968,470. We are just finding it very challenging to try to find any more reductions that we can possibly make without seriously affecting some of the classrooms that we have in our buildings. So the ask is for you to consider allowing us to take $1 million out of fund balance. The next document will show you the fund balance. that together.
Tammy, can I ask you, you mentioned the carryover, federal special ed.
Mhm.
We're including the carryover in the total of what we still need for the 900s? Okay.
So if we look at the fund balance estimate, you can see the actuals for 22-23. We used $2.7 million in fund balance. I've split out the total fund balance again for total fund balance and the unassigned fund balance. As you recall from our past conversations, the unassigned fund balance we can use for anything that we need to in the district. We also have restricted fund balance, which we can only spend for those restricted categories. We have non-spendable, which is usually inventory. And then we have assigned fund balance for things that we set aside for specific reasons. For instance, one of the things that we set aside in unassigned fund balance is the dollars for any class size adjustments that we need to make in the fall. We've done that for the last 2 years, so we're going to continue to do that. So if we look at the fund balance in 22-23, we ended up with $19.3 million or 13.6 in unassigned, which was about 11.75 or 16.6 of the total fund balance. Our projections for this year, you allowed us to use $1.4 million of fund balance this year in order to balance the budget. So anticipating that coming out of fund balance, it will reduce our fund balance, total fund balance from 19.3 to 17.8, which is about 15.31%, or the unassigned from 13.6 to 12.1, which is about 10.45. And then if in fact you do approve letting us use the $968,470 out of fund balance for next year, the fund balance will go from 17.8 to 16.8 or 13.87. The unassigned from 12.1 to 13.1 or 12.81. And those numbers are within board policy. Just keeping in mind that the dollars that we spend, that we use fund balance for, we strategically make sure that those dollars are one-time expenses, because we don't want to use ongoing expenses coming out of fund balance, because once you use them, they're gone.
So we have 10.81 and 13.87 in the document and what's online. You just said 12 or some other number, or are we looking at the right percentage?
Oh,
She was saying from
12.1 million.
Okay, 12.1 million. I heard percentage, I just want to make sure we're.
Which is about 10.45%.
So knowing that they're one-time funds, can you provide us some clarity around what that one-time expense would be for the $1 million? Because I think there was some discussion or concern about, was the bus contract really a one-time fund, a one-time expense last year? And so I'm just curious if you can tell us what those, of the $1 million, what are those one-time expenses?
We did not use the bus contract as part of the fund balance. We did use the new snowplow as part of the one-time money.
From last year.
Yeah, from last year. So it would be things like enhancing our curriculum. It would be things like
I mean, just like anything, I think we want to know what we're spending, what this money is going to be approved for.
Well, I mean, it's all right here when you look at the deficit.
Some
I
category.
mean, we're short almost $1 million, you know, so we got to figure it out. We have rainy day money to do it. Obviously, it's not a long-term solution. We know this. We'd still be within policy, you know, talking at a high level, well within policy.
So here's what I would, thank you for the ask. And right now, tonight, if we have the thumbs to move forward in that direction, we'll come back with an itemized report, as we did last year, around the one-time usage of funds, so that it shows that it's not having reoccurring, for example, like an FTE or a contract that we know is we're always gonna have buses. So we can have an itemized report, obviously for the main budget that you would approve at the end, but that can be part of another budget update. But there may be some one-time operational or capital expenses that we can encumber through fund balance and pull that off the reoccurring Fund 1 general ledger, so that allows us to have that carryover freed up. So we can get that itemization so that the board has that, so you can be certain that it's not a reoccurring cost.
I mean, one thing that, this had been brought to my attention kind of when we went through this budget process before, is that another district I know, they actually engage their, the finance committee, and what they'll do is they'll take those one-time spends and present them to the finance committee, and then the finance committee sort of does an analysis of how does this one-time spend like impact the district, and engaging them in that process as well. So
they are certainly made aware. That's one of the presentations that we do give to the finance committee is here's what our plan is to spend.
But like on a detailed level, like
have
whether it's more
last year.
cameras for the high school or whatever it might be, but they sort of bring their recommendation of this is what we think is best for our district from a one-time spend investment. Just another example of how another district does things differently than we do. I thought it was a great idea, so I just wanted to share that again since we're talking again about one-time spends.
Finance committee, I believe that was done.
That we did
Yeah,
present that to the finance committee
We
last year.
talked about, well, even in the last meeting, we run through this exact, a lot of the same conversations.
I'm talking like, and meant to just be clear,
Yeah,
a very
at a deeper
detailed,
level.
we're buying buses versus cameras, and what
At a
makes the
deeper
most
level.
sense for our district from a community standpoint, what does our community support? But going to the finance committee where you do have community members involved in that process engages, not only adds transparency, but also engages the community in the conversation.
We also have to keep in mind that we're not 100% sure that we're going to hit our enrollment target. Because we are still 200 students short from what our original enrollment projection was. And if we in fact do not get those 200 kids, I mean, again, we're thinking positively and hope that we will, because typically during the summer we do pick up a lot of kids that are just not enrolled right now. But if we don't, that's about $1.5 million that our revenue would need to be reduced. And then also, we have a lot of unknowns right now in special education. We have a lot of students that are in assessments right now. We don't know necessarily what their final IEP is going to look like until their final assessments are done. So we do need to look at putting aside some dollars to meet those needs of the student once they figure out what their needs are.
Tammy, my understanding was, or, even from the last meetings, that it was the biggest driver of our newfound deficit on top of our other deficits is special ed. Because we've already had an ingestion rate of a larger percentage than what we anticipated. And of course, we've already got the cross subsidy going on and going strong, despite the extra funding coming in from the state. So could you help explain how that plays into this one time on the fund balance?
Yeah, so I'm actually gonna have Director Chuka speak to that a little bit around some of the context that Tammy was just talking about. Also, if you can just pick up a little bit on the cross-subsidy reimbursement and kind of how that, because that was a big conversation with staff as well, and where that has already been spent, so that the realization of that wasn't a net for us, and then go into the FTE conversation, if I may.
Yeah, so there's, I think last year's cross-subsidy aid was 40% of the cross-subsidy, so if ours was 6 or 7 million, we got like 3 million or something. And we added staff last year. We added a psychologist, we added additional speech and some teachers just to keep up with that. So that was spent, so
And then we had the additional contract, right? Then the contract we added to their.
Yep.
So they got their general increase.
Yep,
which
so
took
with
most of
salaries,
that.
absolutely, there was an increase there. And I think, you know, we're looking at the same trend. So while we're declining enrollment as a district, we're actually increasing our special education numbers. So decrease in students, but more of our students are qualifying for special education services. So that is not a trend that's unique to Prior Lake Savage area schools. That's statewide, or I dare say nationwide, but for sure it's statewide, that is occurring. We're still below the state average, so we're not, I don't feel like it's an alarming, you know, number. So with that, then the cross-subsidy aid for this year would also be eaten up with the asks here that we're asking to help do that. We're never gonna be whole in special education, so that's kind of an important thing to know. We get reimbursed about 75% of what we spend. So what we spend this year, we'll get back 75% of that next year, right? That's the revenue that Tammy puts in there. But that's including the cross-subsidy aid. So we'll always have to spend about 25% of the cost will come out of the general fund for special education.
And that's an increase from, what was it in the last couple of years? Because it increased, there was an increase.
I think it went up to 50, it'll go up to 50% this year, or somewhere right around there. I'll have to go look up the exact.
Well, it was 50 and it's at 70?
No, it was at 40. The cross-subsidy aid was 40%, or so, somewhere around there, and it's up closer to 50% this next, for coming up here.
Prior to the legislation, though, it was right around, I think, 17 or 20%.
Yeah.
Legislation increased it to 44 and then 50%.
There you go, 44 and 50.
Yeah, I saw it somewhere, I'm looking, I can't find my report that I pulled, but yes, I saw it, that it's increased quite a bit, so.
Yeah, and you know, whether or not it'll ever get whole, I don't know the answer to that. We do, in all of our groups, advocate both at the state and federal level. It's a underfunded mandate, right? But it's, you know, we do get quite a bit of support for it, and we want to help the students, so it's something that, you know, we'll do our best to meet all the needs of all of our students.
So if you have a student who's identified with an IEP, they get additional funding, is that correct?
Well,
for our district?
Yes,
but I know there's additional expenses as well, correct?
Yes, we get reimbursed on 75% of any additional expenses due to special education. Easiest way to say it.
You know, because we've got that year lag and because we are increasing the number of IEPs, it seems kind of out of balance a little bit. Like we can grow in the number of special ed students way faster than the funding is keeping up.
I do not disagree, that is correct.
Okay.
So we're always funded a year behind.
Right. And a year behind with yet a previous year's numbers on top of that, right?
Yes.
Correct.
Okay.
Yep.
Yeah, and that's unfortunately the basic formula for all federal funded. It's always based on prior year enrollments or identifications in special ed. And so then your current year that you might have higher amount of students who qualify, you're still only receiving what you generated from the students in the previous year. So that's where that cross-subsidy conversation comes into play, because we obviously have to meet the students who are with us this year, not the ones that were, well, the ones last year and now that increased for this year.
And this wouldn't be unique to our district,
No,
obviously.
this is state.
But how do we compare to other districts as far as that shortfall? Is it all based on?
We're pretty good compared to some.
Yeah, I was gonna say, because I'm looking at the history and it looks like
Yeah.
we're small compared to Lakeville or Craig or Belle Plaine or Shakopee, I'm just looking at, so. And why is that, just out of curiosity?
We're efficient. I mean, just like anything in our district, we're lean, and we do, we're squeezing a lot out of a little. So I would say that would be the biggest.
That's great.
That's not sustainable.
Well, that's why we have the ask of additional staffing that, you know, hoping that.
But I just want to, the fund balance is a one-time. If we add additional staffing with one-time funding, then
You
can't do that. The next year, that's not sustainable, so.
Yeah, so, I'm sorry, to be clear, we're asking for use of fund balance for next year, knowing that it's just putting a Band-Aid on it right now, and we're going to have to look at other reductions in 25, 26 in order to truly balance the budget. We just felt like $5 million reduction this year is a lot. and had some significant impact. And we just are unable to find some additional reductions in order to meet some of those. So I do acknowledge it's putting a Band-Aid on it. And then we'll have to look at 25, 26 and make some other.
And I think there are some other cuts that we would like to make, and I think it's readying the system to absorb that level of reduction that is inevitable that will be coming for next year.
Well, what's always concerned me is when we talk about how efficient we are, we spend how many thousands of dollars less per student than other districts, even in our general area. There's only so much you can do before you're really dropping so far below subsistence level, and it hurts educational outcomes.
So, Michelle, and I know that if we thumbs up and move forward with this conversation, I know, as you said, Dr. Thomas, we're going to get kind of a list of kind of what would come out, but knowing that the majority of the fund balance request is for special ed. So when I'm looking at the original presentation, so is this kind of, for lack of a better way to put it, is this kind of null and void if?
Some of it is, so that not all of it, because we did some changes with the way that we're using our federal funds to pay off our tuition billing, which increases revenue, so that like $600,000 or $700,000 piece is still there. That still will increase our revenue. So, but the teacher and the 5 paras, yes, that I'm taking back plus some.
So about 240 from this, about 245.
In the end, Jess, yes. The most simplest way is yes, it's taking it all back. Yep, it is just the way that we. I got caught up again. Tammy and I had this conversation.
Okay.
I get stuck on the revenue expense, but in the end, yes.
Yeah, every time we talk, I keep going back to this presentation because it was actually laid out so well and it's so easy to understand. So
yes,
that's helpful.
In the end, the bottom line is it does take the majority of that back.
And we haven't, in like the last couple of meetings where we've had to say goodbye to some people, are any of those people, had we not done that yet?
I have not cut positions out of special education.
None of the non-renewal list that came forward was due to reductions in special education.
Okay, thank you. We're not backtracking,
Just to be
basically,
clear,
is what I'm saying.
If we're increasing positions, we will try to find other things to take out of fund balance that are one time. We want to keep salaries in the general fund as much as we can.
Right.
So going back to the one-time fund, one-time spend, and maybe you can just clarify for me the bus contract, because I know we talked about that, but it was $339,000 that was from fund balance that said transportation contract increase. That's what I was referring to as far as I thought that was not a one-time spend, was that contract increase.
I believe that, if I'm wrong, but I believe that was some additional equipment that was on the buses that we
we actually added on our special ed routes, we actually enhanced the security of the bus systems on those particular routes due to some of the behavioral concerns and challenges that were being demonstrated. So cameras, etc.
Transportation contract increase. And then I just want to go back to something that Chair France said, and I've heard you say it a couple times at these meetings, and I know that there is this perception, and it was from the board prior to me being on the board, that we spend less than other districts. And when I look at the revenue and the expenses from surrounding districts, and you can pick and choose which districts you want to look like, but Jordan is right on par with us. Belle Plaine is less, New Prague is less, and Shakopee is just a titch higher. So I think I have it right here.
We haven't shared it, Robbie, so they're comparative school districts of our like size and demographics. We've been consistent for that one, and it was on our last audit report where even the auditor said you spend an average of $2,000 less per student.
I remember hearing it, but I think it depends on which district you compare it to. So like I said, and you can verify this, but I think it's an important conversation that is a part of our budget, that we just need to be really clear with information that we're sharing here at the board table, because our community does listen. And we are, like I said, we're not the lowest out there as far as how we.
I think the key word there was like size.
Yeah, they compare us to like size.
And I think on our website, we have a Finance 101 section on our website that we recently added. One of those shows how we spend our money. And the analysis on there shows that as a statewide average, we actually spend $2,500 less per student than the state average.
Statewide, and like Shakopee is 13,000 and we're at 12,000 from 21-22 benchmark data. So that, I look at that as like a like size.
Yeah, and I would just be cautious when you do that comparison, because when you go on the MD website to look at the amount spent per student, it's not real clear cut. There is a, if you pull up the spreadsheet, it will tell you in the top corner how they arrive at the different numbers and comparisons. It's not like the way that you think it would be. Instructional support includes a lot of things that you don't necessarily assume go into instructional support, just as their school administration. It's all by the UFAR's account codes, and we have to compare. Essentially, the way that we had to do it was do a data dump of all of our UFAR's codes, sort them by the way that the state does it, and then get that comparison. So if you're just looking at a budget or a financial statement for a district, it may not be the same number that we're comparing with what MDE has for that amount. Just the way that it's calculated. So I would just caution before we.
Right, so I'm gonna ask the board, are you, how are we doing with taking a cut out of our fund balance to the 968,000?
Can I add a caveat with the itemization that will be coming to the board as well?
Yes, yes.
Of non-reoccurring expenses.
Now, this is not a vote, it is a thumbs up.
For directional.
For direction, right, because we don't vote on the budget until actually June. But we need a way to be able to make sure Tammy's got the right direction.
I mean, the way I look at it, I look as an investment. So, I mean, are we willing to make an investment in areas that we need in our district? I would be, again, as long as we've gone through and we've scrubbed all the expenses that we've, done, and I know we have, I think that's, I'm fine with that.
Thumbs up. Okay. Director Atkinson?
I'm fine with that.
Yeah, I agree.
Okay, there you go.
We'll bring that as an update with our next budget update.
Thank you.
The next area we wanted to talk about is possible referendum. And before we start kind of digging into that, I just would like to, if you'll indulge me, just give a little history on referendum. It's come to our attention that there is some information out on social media that doesn't necessarily reflect the entire history of what has happened with the referendum. So again, if you'll just indulge me a little bit. The original referendum became statute in 1971 as part of the Minnesota Miracle, for anybody that was around then. They didn't really have a lot of restrictions on how it was spent or how you were able to get the dollars. Then they, in 2015, they changed some of the, back to 2001, they moved part of the $450 of referendum, and they reduced the referendum amount and added it to the formula allowance. And then they tried to make it, what they've been trying to do all along is make this equitable for every district in the entire state. And as you know, because it's based on market value, there are some great fluctuations in market value in many of the districts. So they've been trying to get this to be equal or equalized. And in 2013, they made, starting with the 2015 school year, they moved $300, which was in the Tier 1 referendum. They moved it to be approved with board authority rather than voter-approved authority. And then had 3 equalization tiers. And in 2019, they said, we're just going to create a new levy funding category called local optional revenue, which puts it into the regular levy that you have to approve every year. And they moved that $300 from voter-approved referendum to local optional, which was board-approved. That was done for every school district across the state. It just tried to make it a little more equal. They also reduced from 3 tiers to 2 tiers, and then the equalization is based on the market value. They also changed that they used to have the referendum per pupil was based on residential pupil units. They changed it so that it is now based on adjusted pupil units. So it basically changed the population of who you were allowed to get referendum dollars for. Consequently, when we approved the referendum, the voter-approved referendum in 2017, the ask of the voters was $923. In 2019, they moved the $300 out of the voter-approved to the regular board-approved levy, took it out of referendum. And we acknowledged that that was kind of a neutral revenue shift, but it also restored the revenue amounts back to voter-approved authority. So now what they do is, in state statute, it tells a cap. It gives you how much of a cap that you are allowed to ask for as a per pupil amount. There's an inflationary factor built into that. If you ask the voters for an inflation factor, you can add that to your referendum amount. We did not do that in 2017, so consequently we are not getting an inflation factor. But they also look at the cap that's in legislation, which is $2,079.50 per pupil unit. They, when a school district asks for a referendum, if you go to the cap, they take that $2,079 and reduce it by $300 because you've already got it in the local optional. So I know that's confusing, and there's equalization aid in there. There's just a lot of other things. But I wanted people to understand that while it looked in 2017, we did ask voters for $923. Our authority right now is $623 because of the moving the local optional. So it's really confusing.
And our cap is 1779.
Yeah.
Yeah, okay,
Yeah.
yeah. Making sure I'm tracking.
And so I understand, thank you, that was really helpful to understand that. I know we've talked a little bit about it, but that was, the way you explained it was great, so thank you. So you're saying like it also, the one thing about legislation that also changed is that we as a board could decide that we could just say, hey, we're gonna approve the 623, and that would continue for the next 10 years without going to the voters.
So there was a change in the 2023.
Yeah, can I ask you a question? Like, why would we do that before it expires? Would there be a need to do that before it expires in 29, or?
Why would we ask voters for?
Why would we as a board approve that, like now, versus waiting till when it gets closer to expire?
Well, I think what we're asking now is to kind of revoke what we currently have and ask for a higher amount.
So it would be.
All we're going to do is.
It's called the revoke and replace, I think.
Right.
Revoke and
Right.
replace. Okay.
Or repeal and replace.
Repeal and
Yeah,
replace.
yeah.
Okay.
I don't know the technical term, but that's the process that we're getting towards.
if we're in fact not going to do that, there really isn't any reason for the board to decide now. I mean, it's gonna expire, but I think, as you've seen in our budget moving forward, one of the only other ways that we're gonna generate revenue in this district is to ask our voters for additional revenue.
And can you explain how a repeal and replace works as far as like, I don't know if there's anything really to explain. Basically, it's does it just, okay,
So if we went to the polls this fall,
Yeah.
a little more time, this fall, well, first of all, we will be coming to the board in May to have discussion on what a proposed question or questions would be, and what specifically we would expect to gain from additional resource in terms of our promise and commitment back to the community. So that would be the conversation we bring to you all in May. In May, you all will have discussion about that, and we'll answer any questions that you have. If the board at that time says, no, we are not going to move forward collectively with going to the polls in the fall, then conversation ends there. If you all are saying, yes, this is something we want to present to our community to allow them to have decision, and that's what you will support. And so we'll then bring that forward to our community in the fall during the November election. At that time, essentially what we're asking the community, because what we are currently receiving is, as you can see, we have been building towards this for many years, and it's not going to get us where we would desire to be, and in terms of total supports and aspirational outcomes for our students. We would be asking the community to repeal our current levy of $600 and some dollars that we are currently, and replace it with a different levy structure and a different financial ask. And we'll talk about a couple of different scenarios here in just a minute. And if that were to pass, then starting the following year of that July 1, that fiscal year, that new levy amount would then kick in. If it doesn't pass, our current levy holds. And to Director Atkinson's question, one of two options are still on the table. The first option is we could go back the following year and revise what we might have asked the first year, learning some things from the community, and attempt a second time. If that passes, it passes. If it doesn't pass, then we will be at the point where this current levy will expire then. In 20...
I think it expires in 29.
Yeah.
Is what the original
so
original thing.
Right, of when they would actually kick in. Yep. So we would, by the time, and I might have my fiscal years off in my sequencing here, but essentially we'll get to a point where this current levy will expire. At that time is when the board could take your one-time decision authority by statute to say, okay, this is going to expire, we clearly need something, so we're going to just renew this, and you will vote on that as a board, and that does not go to the polls. And you can only do that one time and only approve the exact structure that you currently have.
Right.
And so, I don't know if that answered the question.
Yeah, it does. And then whatever, if it does pass this fall, then you still have that, the board then has the authority to do that one-time approval.
That is correct.
That 10-year period.
With the new structure that we have, so within that 10-year time frame, the board would be able to renew that one time. If in 10 years from now we wanted to do that, we could certainly do that.
Did you just say this, so that if we do the one-time renewal, it would be for another 10 years?
Yeah, if the board does a renewal, it's only, your only authority to renew is what you currently have in place, exactly as it's structured.
So if it's a 10-year that we're going for, we would be able to.
We would renew a
for
10-year again.
Right, okay.
Now, again, you could renew, okay? If I could just hypothetically play this out, you could make a decision this year and renew what you currently have for another 10 years if you wanted to, okay? And in that 10 years time frame, you could go to the community at some point and make some, ask as well. You're not prohibited from doing that, but you can only renew one time for your exact same structure.
And just for the public, the fiscal year 29 is actually 2028 because.
28, 29, yeah. 28 school year.
It's actually calendar year 28.
Yep. Thank you. All right, sorry. Perhaps you go ahead.
So along those lines, I've included in your packet the actual statute 126C-17 that explains the referendum revenue.
I think we did a better job explaining.
Yeah, it was super helpful. I mean, there's a lot of great information in here, so, but I thought it was.
Yeah,
it's great.
It's very confusing, and it's, yeah.
Phone a friend and we'll be there to walk you through it if we need to on a one-to-one, seriously as well, just because I know it can be kind of.
Please repeat that.
Like phone one of us and we'll kind of
yeah.
walk you through separately if you need to as well.
Yeah, thank you.
The next item in your packet is the referendum scenarios. I'll walk you through these. These, again, it's a little confusing, but we have scenario A, B, C, and D. There's A, B, and C.
Maybe it's you.
In scenario A, and scenario A and B have two columns. For now, just look at the first column, the fiscal year 26 to 28. So in scenario A, we have done some analysis and looked at the property, the home value in our district. And it's a little over $430,000. Now, given that we have many townships, cities, we have Savage, Prior Lake, there's some townships and others, they all have a different average. Some of them are higher. Savage, the home values are a little lower than they are in Prior Lake. Credit River is much higher than it is in Prior Lake. So as you look at all of the home values, the average is about $430,000. So we're going to highlight a home value of $450,000 for the purpose of walking through this.
Can I ask where that data is pulled from? Like, where do you get that
From
number
Scott County.
Because I understand you can pull it, maybe Julie, being a realtor, I think you can pull it from MLS as well.
Yeah, but there's a whole spreadsheet that the county gives us.
Okay, so the county is similar to MLS, or? I was just talking to a realtor friend, and they said that they would pull it from MLS, the average, so I was just curious.
You can pull average home sale price, but that is not the same
As average home.
as your home value.
Oh, okay, that makes sense.
Much different.
So in scenario A, in that first column, if we were to say, ask our voters to approve a $30 a month increase in their property tax based on a $450,000 home, it would increase our current $623 referendum by $780, or a total new referendum of $1,404 per pupil. That would generate about an additional $7.1 million into the district. And I just want you to keep in mind in the back of your head that we are cutting $5 million this year. So asking for an additional $780 will get us a little over $2 million additional. We would still be looking at some program reductions the following year. Again, inflation, our salaries are going up, everything is increasing, our health insurance, everything will more than likely go up. So just keeping that in the back of your head, it would generate $7.1 million. If we asked our taxpayers to approve $45 a month on a $450,000 home, That would increase the new referendum ask would be $1,803 per pupil and would generate about $10.8 million. In scenario C, that's the cap that we can ask for.
By statute.
By statute. So that would be $61 per pupil unit, and it would generate $14.7 million.
$61 per month.
Yep, $61 per month.
Sorry.
Or on a $450,000 home. You can see there's different home values, so it'll look different depending on what your home value is. One of the other things that we were looking at in scenario A and B, in that second column where it says fiscal year 29 to 35, which extends that window out to 10 years, we have 2 bonds that we currently have that are going to be paid for in fiscal year 29. Bonds are paid, the interest and principal are paid through debt service, which is a levy to our taxpayers. So our taxpayers are essentially paying for principal and interest on those bonds. When they expire, there will be no more principal and interest. So the debt service levy will go down for our property taxpayers by about $16 a month. It's not going to be one-to-one because of the way the market value is calculated.
Just to clarify, go down by or now be 16? Because
It would be reduced, the debt service levy.
Yeah, so the total would be 16. That would be on the 14 because you have the monthly pay here after the
So
bonds
yeah,
paid off.
that's
Just
step
wanna make
2.
sure, yeah. Okay.
So the debt service would be reduced by about $16 on your property tax statement. There's a line that when you see at the, in December when we give you here's what our levy is for you to approve, one of those lines is debt service. So 2 bonds paid off, the debt service levy will go down about $16 per month for taxpayer in a $450,000 home. So what we could do is to make it sort of revenue neutral or neutral for our taxpayers is in fiscal year 29, ask for an increase in the operating levy by $16 per month on a $450,000 home. Because we're reducing debt service, we can increase the operating portion. And that would get us an additional $3.9 million. It's just a scenario that's out there. It's something that we've looked at. It's certainly not anything that we need to pursue. It's just another way of getting some additional revenue.
Would that be 2 questions?
I was
No,
just
so
going to
this-
ask, in statute, don't you have to ask one question,
Yeah,
right?
well,
Is that-
no, you can ask multiple questions,
Oh, okay.
so a couple of
That
things.
somewhere.
We are sharing this with you in a study session to have a think aloud. We are not suggesting, we are not wedded to any of this. We just really want to inform you all as a board and our community about the variety of scenarios that exist. And so essentially, if we were to just look at, the $30 a month, which is roughly the range that Morris Leatherman showed on the presentation, 30, 35 or whatever, that we could easily go to the community and have a conversation with that might be affirmative, okay? So that's the first scenario, column A, okay? Or column 1 in scenario A. Now, as you heard Director Frederickson share, given our current financial reality, this will essentially keep us treading water and maybe slow the bleed, but we're still going to be looking at ways that we're going to have to reduce our expenditures because, again, just using our current $5 million deficit, if this is what we net, we're really only going to be netting about $2 million. So nothing real aspirational. If you all recall from that presentation as well, there were about 8 to 10 8 to 10 priorities that our community said, yes, we would raise our taxes if we could get personalized learning, behavior management, class size, etc. There's about 8 or 10 things that they valued. And if you recall that evening I was sharing, even if we passed in scenario C to the max, everything that was on that list that the parents said that they would raise their taxes for, we wouldn't be able to pay for, okay? So they're asking for the moon, but we wouldn't have that revenue coming in, even at the max. So we have to, and that's the point I was making that night, we have to temper the expectations of our community and their desires. And I'll just use class size as an example. When we talk about class size, and if we're looking at about 25 on average at the elementary of a class size, when families say they would support a levy or increase in taxes for lower class sizes, they're not thinking from 25 to 24 in their head. They're thinking 25 to maybe 17, 18, okay? Well, in general, K-12, to reduce class size by 1, it's about $1 million in our district. So do the math, class size alone, under scenario A, you couldn't do it all, right? So what we're suggesting is that another option is that in 2 years, we could go back for a different conversation with the community. So if we went to the community this fall with scenario A, 2 years when those bonds are ready to come off the tax ledger, we would ask the community, we could potentially ask the community again in saying, hey, the debt service that was on your property tax statement of $16 a month, we're asking if we can retain that and move that towards our operating revenue. It's already being paid, and we're just asking if we can shift it from the bonds to our operating, so that we would net about $46 a month, which brings us closer to that mid scenario of about, sorry, my computer went to sleep, 10 point something million, okay? So that's why we wanted to give you all just some illustrative examples of how staging conversations, and one of you talked about how other districts that are sitting, you know, upwards of 2,000 or, you know, or so dollars per student didn't get there overnight in one vote, right? They kind of built towards that. And those are some of the conversations that I wanted you all to be briefed on in terms of what could a stair-step conversation look like, and not, in delivering so that we can show, yep, we delivered on our promise, or we're currently delivering on our promise, and now we're asking if we can go a step further and retain the debt service and shift it over to operating, et cetera. Sorry.
That next document in your packet will show the debt service. Will be paid off $4,158,000 in bonds, and then it just shows you again how much the debt service levy would be reduced.
In talking out loud, or processing out loud, our history in this district for going for referendum, going for levy, it's typically, I mean, the last time it was 2021.
The tech levy.
In 2019 is the
17
was the one that
It was the current operating levy.
Which is the operating levy.
And it passed,
And
I
so-
believe it's 62%.
I'm just thinking back to when my oldest was in 6th grade in the first parent advisory meeting I went to at the middle school. And that was probably the first time Dr. Edwards and I met. And you shared that our district has always been or has had the history of being maybe, I don't remember your exact wording, but behind. Like by the time one thing passes, we're already in a need for another. And so in just listening to what's being presented tonight and doing a talk out loud, I'm thinking, what would it look like if we are changing that cycle going forward? When you talk about in whatever year, in 2 years from now, that those
The debt service,
and then going back for an ask. I mean, that's something that our community has not been accustomed to. It has been, you know, longer intervals in between. Maybe it's been, for lack of better terms, like a dire need. Like we're finding ourselves in a dire need, or
So I will.
Yeah.
So I would say that.
I'm wondering what other districts look like when if other districts are asking more frequently.
Every district's community is different. So we can't necessarily compare why would this one pass or fail and pass, whenever the nuances are so unique to the community. What I will say, if I can kind of get into the question that I was hearing you kind of put on the table is, there's a reactionary vote, and then there's a responsive vote. And I kind of liken it to Minnesota. This is no slam on our roads and construction, but I don't know if 494 will ever get done. It's always behind. By the time they finish that construction project, they need to do something different. That I might be asking myself as the layperson, like, well, why wouldn't you just added that extra lane while you're doing it all anyways, right? That's the conversation in my head. And I think kind of channeling your question of, well, if we know that this won't get us to a certain level of aspiration and responsiveness to needs of students, and we know that we would need perhaps a higher ask, why wouldn't we just maybe do that on the front side versus going back multiple times? I think.
Well, and if I could just clarify too, because actually I'm thinking maybe not, you know, what would it look like if we were asking more often? I think sometimes it's like we don't want to hear the ask. We don't want to hear, like, I'll just say personally, right? You know, like, oh, it's another ask, another tax increase, another whatever.
You run the risk of the frequency of asks.
Yeah.
Yet you benefit from keeping the community informed along the journey of delivering on the promise of your original ask. So it's a little bit of a chicken and an egg. I would say that when you look at the scenarios, if you look at just scenario B, column 1, you kind of get to that. So this here is a culmination of a multi-year ask in scenario A. Go this fall and make an ask. 2 years from now, convert debt service to operational ask. Or you could go to the community and say, scenario B, column 1 ask, never have the conversation again for 10 years, okay? Versus having a conversation now, 2 years from now or so, whatever, 5 years from now, roughly 4 or 5 years, then have an operational debt service conversation shift. You could eliminate that, because effectively you would essentially get to that in the first column in scenario B. So you all can kind of see and play with these as you're thinking. And again, I offer to sit down with each of you to kind of explore your thinking on these scenarios, and after tonight as well. But these are just some that we were considering based upon Morris Leatherman, CISO, our communications kind of levy technical support provider, that we wanted to share with you all tonight.
I think adding on to the Morris Leatherman, I mean, keeping in mind that the highest percentage was that taxpayers are willing to pay nothing at 31%, and then the next one goes to $15 was 23%, and then the appetite to pay $30 was only 17%, and then it dropped off greatly from there. So, I mean, I think going to the levy to ask you also want to have some sort of predictability of whether you want to waste your resources in order to, you know.
So we hedge our bets, right,
Yeah,
with the
right.
conversation, and so
Mhm.
what
That's what we did
what
the
is a
survey.
balance, yep, and what is a balance of going to ask for what we know we need that will actually make an impact and that won't kind of scare off the voter, if you will, okay? That's kind of the balancing act that we've got before us.
Well, and I think it'd be helpful for, I mean, you did these scenarios before for us, so like these kind of what-if scenarios. We talked about this back in October. It would be really helpful before our next conversation to see, as you've done the ABC scenarios, what does it look like from a 5-year standpoint forecast? Because I think, you know, we saw the numbers before, but right now, our projection budget numbers have changed. And the other thing is, when you're talking about projected budget, are you considering additional funding that perhaps could come in this legislative session, whether it's the READ Act or there's a couple other funding that is potentially going to come out of this legislative session as well. So keeping that in mind, as well as we did max certify the levy back in December, which was an additional $1.4 million that we went to our tax vote, that our taxpayers will already see on their tax statements for what, 24, correct? Yeah, because we max certified in December, so we're seeing it this year already. Yeah, we're seeing it this year. So there's a lot of different factors to keep in mind.
Can I say something quick?
Yes, please.
Thanks. I guess the question I constantly grapple with is, we have to look at the district and we have to decide with all the data you've given us financially if we're overspending, period. Or if our state and federal formulas leave us underfunded. And it's kind of simple. And you just have to decide what it is. And if you keep showing us the percentages of we're staying within each category, eventually the data doesn't lie there, right? If the spend is accurate, I mean, we're either overspending, and some people might believe that, or we might just actually be in a situation where our formulas don't provide us with funds to educate our students. Pretty simple. So, I mean, that's kind of how I look at it. And I would encourage everybody to do that. If you have students and you believe in education, those are the sorts of things that you have to start grappling with, because you just can't keep up.
I think too, piggybacking on that as well, Dr. Bernick, I think too, back in 2017, that was a different vote. That was, you know, bonds are for buildings, levies are for learning, right? That's how I remember it. And this one will be, I'm sorry, not will, if we do this. I think it's important for the community too, like it, you know, what we did in 2017 is for different things than potentially for this year if it passes. I think that's important as well. You know, like we did construction projects, we built a new school, which is wonderful, but like what happens inside and who is inside with everything going on. I think that's an important thing to distinguish. Because, I mean, I'm sure I don't want to speak for anybody, but I'm sure it's like, well, what did we get in 2017? Well, that was very different. Also needed. But I guess to your point, it's just like the investment that they're different kinds of investments, and
It wasn't 2017, I know there was a two-part, it was the building, but wasn't it part of it just to fund the building, like, right?
Or it wasn't included, it was one, they decided not to do it different ways because the first time they tried to separate the operations from the building is when we had, I think, Red Tail Ridge, and it had to be mothballed for a year because we didn't have the operations fund, and even to open it up, we could build it, we couldn't pay the utilities and the staff to go in there. So this time they actually made it, in 2017, they made it one question and combined it both.
And sold bonds.
Yeah.
To fund the high school.
So I think one of the questions that I'm actually, well, one of the statements that I'm kind of noodling around is there's a difference between just treading water and actually doing what we've heard the community wants us to do with learning and improving educational outcomes. And I think that needs to be built in there to what exactly we want to or can accomplish with the funds. I think it's really important that we do talk about, you know, when we're looking at learning models and comparing them, what really makes the difference between being able to invest in each student's outcome? What do the districts do? What does the learning models do that say what you're supposed to do, and how do we fund that? So if we took what we really need and we backed into any one of these as far as actually improving those test scores as much as we can, that's going to really make the difference. Unfortunately, if the first scenario is just going to help us tread water, we're not going to get anywhere. Actually, we're probably going to go behind.
And that's what we will plan to be bringing to the board in May. And certainly open to have conversations with any of you in between now and then. But when we come back to you, part of what we want to do is temper the expectations and say, okay, within these scenarios, here's what we believe we can do, plus here's what we would like to do, and here's what the potential cost would be, and where does that compare, you know, in terms of outcome driven decision making. So that's part of our plan, so that you all can kind of see from each scenario what we intend to be able to accomplish within reason, and given, you know, I think the conversation both Director Burnick and Atkinson presented tonight around the 5-year forecast within the scenarios. What does that play out to be, given some of the current statute? But then also, I think it does beg the question, why are we seeing well over $300+ million being reduced in the metro area? It's not that communities don't value education, or that, you know, there is a structural conversation or question that we have to be asking ourselves, and collectively bringing that question to the state. So, yeah.
If I may pick up there, because it brings me back to what Director William had said around recalling 8 years ago, or whenever that conversation was. That was a scenario of where we were, and frankly, we arguably continue to be there. And in the competitive marketplace with the surrounding districts, to that point of $300 million across the metro being reduced, I'm gotta think, if they're not having these conversations at 4 tables like we are tonight, other districts are on the verge of having those conversations, if they haven't already. And we may find ourselves once again, as we look at those scenarios that are presented to you for conversation tonight, we need to ask ourselves and look at those scenarios and say, do we want to continue to be behind in this conversation, or do we want to begin to move in a direction toward being where we want to be from a competitive perspective? Because the likelihood that other districts are having these conversations and are going to continue to have these conversations is probably quite high.
Yeah, and to that point, and those of you who have been at a couple of these scale presentations, we can look at the demographer's data. K-12 population, we are an aging state. That is a reality. And to Director Burnick's point, that's the workhorse of revenue for districts, is enrollment. And if we don't have enrollment, I think the question will be around the current funding model that the state currently has, if those demographer stats continue to play out, where we're losing K-12 as a state. So now what do? Because the state won't have the revenue to base that, you know, formula on to adequately fund school systems. So now, what is the model? So there's two simultaneous conversations that will need to happen in this state as we continue to age. One might take a little bit to brew a little bit more, but it's there. I mean, it's being discussed right now, so.
Is it fair to say that if we had 10,000 students like we forecasted back in 2017, that would we be in this situation?
Well, we wouldn't because we'd have more students.
Well, that's what I'm asking. Would we still have to go ask our community for
Right,
more?
I think, yeah.
That's the question, right? I mean,
Right.
that's what we built to.
If we could grow kids, yep, that would work. But we don't have that. And
We also have to keep in mind that if we had 10,000 kids, we also have to hire more staff who are going to be more expensive every year as they settle contracts. You're still going to have support staff. You're still all those things that go along with educating the student. You're still going to have to do times however many students there are. So yes, it would generate more revenue, and I think there are many efficiencies in math that you can
There's
also
we had gotten the
fixed
10,000 students. Mathematically, none of the formulas that were put in 2017 would have ever helped water. So that was
There's certain costs, like admin wouldn't change with 10,000 students.
Right.
You know, building costs
Right.
wouldn't
There
change
are-
with 10,000 students, so.
There are certain economies of scale for sure.
yes, agreed.
That would be realized.
Well, and I think that another thing that needs to be addressed too is that when we talk about funding hasn't kept up with inflation, are we talking about all the funding? Because I've seen data that says that funding has outpaced inflation in our district by 40% when you look at all the funds, not just the general fund.
And I think that's kind of fair, Director Atkinson. I think the conversation we have to kind of open up in that is there are restrictions. When you look at all funding and you aggregate it, there's restrictions of like, we can't use the capital funding for paying teachers. But that's lumped into that all funding then. So I think it skews the perception that you've got all this money. And so, yeah, I would just caution us as we look at that, considering the restrictions that are on some revenue streams.
And I'm challenged too, when we're having these high-level conversations, it's money and outcome. And it's one of the, I shouldn't say that, maybe saying the word challenged isn't the correct term, but there's a little bit of disconnect, for me at least. We're talking about money coming in regarding to outcomes, but it's people, right? We're talking about people, and so one of my favorite things about the start of this year was the power of one. And so like outcomes, there's so many factors to outcomes. It's not just money. It's the teachers, it's it's our community, it's our parents in our community. There's so many factors to the outcomes. And it's so hard, it's to say increase money equals increase outcomes. It's not just that simple. And so,
there's factors though that the revenue will help support.
For sure.
And so, if I kind of transition it to a parallel possible industry, if I'm a coffee house owner and I know I need dollars to buy the best beans, and if I don't have the revenue and I have to buy a lower quality bean that might be more bitter or less flavorful, my sales will go down because people are expecting a better cup of coffee. Just like our resource support for our teachers' ability to improve their craft go down when we don't have resources to invest in the quality of our teachers or the tools that they use to help our kids. Thus, the product of that quality cup of coffee, our kids' outcomes, gets compromised. So, like any business, it takes money to get the profit in the corporate world or to get the outcomes in the academic world, okay? And you're right. There are a lot of factors. It's not a dollar for dollar to outcome and whatnot. It's very complex. So I think, I think what we're sharing with you and kind of closing here tonight is, here are the scenarios that we're currently considering. We want you all to be thinking about this, and we'll bring back a more fleshed out kind of outcome-based model for you all to consider in May. And I go back to Director Bernick's push for all of us to be thinking about what's the simultaneous conversation, perhaps that finds its way into the legislative agenda that you all have discussions about as well, because that's a very real conversation.